Hi, I'm Richard. Welcome to the Old Loki Workshop. How do you make crosscuts and how do you do it safely? By crosscuts we mean cutting the board across this way as opposed to a rip, which is cutting like this. So all table saws normally come with a miter gauge. So here's a miter gauge. It's got a steel bar, slides in this miter slot. And when I want to make this cut across like this, simply place this on here, line it up, run it through the saw, off onto the outfeed table, let the saw stop, and we get the piece back, right? So that's one way to do it. And this works quite well. But there are some other support pieces that we can put on this to make it even better. Here are several additional faces that can be put on the face of the miter gauge to improve performance. They all have the same 2 screws here and a couple of washers, which are going to go into these 2 slots right here. So this one fits on here like this. There's a word right here, it says blade, so the blade is right over in this position. And when I want to make a cross cut, I attach that on there, tighten the screws down, line the thing up, away we go. And it gives me more support, so that's good. Here's another one. This one gives some additional support as far as the workpiece being supported on this side of the blade too. So when I'm running this thing through like this, it helps to prevent a little bit of a tear out here in that with the you know, the blade being in this position. And then here's another one. This one's just bigger, and this little guy goes on here like this, and so it's just a bigger one. And here's where the blade goes through, and then I made a couple of 45 degrees. You can turn this thing and cut something, you know, through like that. So I got a couple of saw curves in there where I've done that. So to make repetitive cuts, how would we do that? Got a long board. I want to cut a bunch of pieces out of it that are exactly the same length. And one of the ways to do that is to use this fence as a guide. So set the fence up from the blade, the distance that I want the length of these to be, and run it through. So is this the way we do it? No, 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 no. You do not use the miter gauge in any of those faces, or the miter gauge by itself. And you do not use those in connection with the fence ever, because this piece of wood is trapped in here, and if it gets off just a little bit, you've got a real problem, and the blade's going to kick it back at you. In fact, a friend of mine once told me that you only do this if you have a death wish. that was his description of doing it this way. So you don't want to do that. So what we want to do is to use a stop block like this. So this stop block's got a couple of bolts that fit in this slot. Tighten these nuts down. Then I move this over to here like this, adjust this for the position, you know, the distance that I want. And then when I go like this thing comes free of the fence, and it's not trapped between the blade and the fence. So go ahead and make my cut, and then I can make, you know, move the board, take the next board, move it in here, and I can make repetitive cuts that way. So you always want to use a stop block that's short of the blade up against the fence if you want to make repetitive cuts in this manner. Now, an even safer way to do that is by the use of a crosscut sled. Here's crosscut sled number 1. This is my favorite crosscut sled. I use it a lot. It's got a couple of screws on here to engage the slots in the miter gauge, and then I got a safety block here because the blade is going to come through this thing, so that helps me remember to keep my thumbs away from this area. So attach this to the miter gauge, put the work in here like this, and away we go. Now the advantage to this is that it carries the work along with it, you know. So this is a really, really good method of making good crosscuts and making them safely on a table saw. Now, this is only about 6.5 inches, this size right here, so I can cut up to about 6.5 inch wide board, or 1 by 6 will fit in there okay. But if I need something bigger than that, I got to have a bigger crosscut sled. So here comes a bigger crosscut sled. This one will get me a 1x12 in here if I need to cut something that big. So same principle, 2 screws here. This one, however, has an additional guide right here, a runner that goes in this miter slot. So I got something in this miter slot, something in this miter slot as well, and push the work through there, and this works quite nicely. You got the safety block on here as well. So it's just a bigger version of that. But what if you want to cut something that's even bigger than that? Then you need a really big crosscut sled. So I'm going to get that out now. So here comes the granddaddy of all crosscut sleds. There you go. Now I claim that this is the largest crosscut sled in the world. And I'm not going to tell you how big it is because someone else is going to, they're going to write in and say, oh, mine's bigger than that, whatever. So I'm not going to go there. But I will tell you that it weighs 36 pounds. And it weighed even more than that before I cut these holes in here, because this is 3/4 inch MDF on when I first made this thing, probably with those pieces in there. And that's really going to increase the weight. It could be 50 pounds, 55 pounds with those pieces, those sections still in there. So it's a huge thing. I can handle 24-inch wide stock in this thing, and it's just a big crosscut sled. So I'll show you some of the features of it. This is 2x. It says 2x material here. That adds to the weight. Of course, it adds to the strength as well. Here's what this looks like underneath. It's got a steel runner here. This is actually aluminum. So I got an aluminum runner here to go into this miter slot, and then I have a piece of oak over here that goes into this miter slot. And here's the saw curve, and then I have these carriage bolts here that bolt down the real fence inside, because the wooden fence that you saw is not actually the fence that's actually used. There's another fence inside that. The real fence consists of this piece of angle iron right here. So this is held down by these carriage bolts, and I got a nut here and a nut here, and this one is intended to be the pivot point, and then this one is the adjustable point. This is held up off of the surface here by a washer that's underneath there, because I was always afraid of junk getting trapped here in this corner up against the fence, and then you put the work in there and you don't notice it and things are going to be off. So it allows sawdust or any junk like that to escape underneath here. At least that's my theory. So put this thing in here, and then tighten it down, get it close with a tri-square, then make some cuts, the 5-cut thing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then take a measurement, make your adjustment, and then tighten this thing back down. Now if I had it to do over again, I would put a bolt through here, through this way. I would put a T-nut in here, and then I'd screw this thing in through the T-nut, and then I can push this thing back, or I can back this bolt off and push it forward and make a finer adjustment that way with a bolt going through there. So that's an idea for you. And then there's another piece of angle iron down here, and I just simply take a good straight edge in there and then line that one up with that. And so that works very nicely, and if things get out of whack or get out of alignment a little bit, you can always make this adjustment. This is my go-to crosscut sled for most of the stuff I'm doing. Very easy to line up. In other words, if you want to cut a board right here, I got a mark there. I simply take this thing, put it in there, line it up with whichever one I've got the mark measured from this end or that end, whatever, one of the sides of this saw curve, because that's exactly where it's going to cut. So if I wanted to cut this piece off, I'd line it up with this side of the saw curve, push it through, boom, I got this cut at exactly the right spot. Now suppose I want to make repetitive cuts. I can do that by placing a stop block on here. Here's a stop block in place to make repetitive cuts that are going to be this long. So put the piece in here and run it through, and then I use a pencil to hold this in place because this is trapped between this stop block and the blade, and that's you got to control this piece or it's going to get away from you and it's going to flick it somewhere. So run it through the saw, bring it back, move this piece. See, it comes back, so you aren't reaching over the saw to get a piece or having multiple pieces wind up out there. So you make the cut, bring it back, take this piece, put it away, take the thing, shove it in some more, make another cut. Works great. So there's a way to make crosscuts using miter gauge with faces, and crosscut sleds, and do it safely. So happy crosscutting.